And so without any further, we'll go ahead on and show you a couple of slides here.
Excellent. Very interesting.
Picking up where we left off, we showed architectonically where the theme of the Kemetic temple passed on from the Great Pyramids and the temples of Egypt and came all the way around and are intricately woven even into the churches and cathedrals today. Again, showing the Salisbury Cathedral here. And we stated in the beginning of the first presentation that the Temple of Aset here, or the Temple of Isis on the island of Philae, was the prototype for all of those temples and cathedrals throughout Europe. Now here's a quotation from Ian Biggs' book, The Code of the Black Virgin. And this is very interesting because there are many scholars, such as Carpenter in this book, Pagan and Christian Creeds, who state that the Cathedral of Notre Dame in France is actually located on the original site of a temple that was once devoted to the worship of Isis. And from Biggs' book, he writes about that particular region and Isis herself, that Isis can easily assimilate such diverse explanations within her all-accommodating universality. But that which honors her most is the derivation of Par Isis, grove or bark of Isis, and the Al de la site bears a close resemblance to a Nile felucca. In Roman times, her temple was at the western limits of the city. So here, Beg points out in his book that the Temple of Isis was located on this particular island, and that in fact the name Paris, France, and so many of us want to take a vacation to Paris. Of those who go next time, perhaps they recall that Par Aset, or Par Isis, the house of Isis, is where Paris itself gets its name. And so if we go directly to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, of course we know that Notre Dame means Our Lady, and cathedral actually comes from the Latin root which means the throne, of course, and that was the symbol of Isis herself, the throne, the mother goddess. And so in the conception of the ancient Egyptian religion, it was the mother, the maternal, who determined the blood lineage and who determined who the pharaoh would be. And so he would actually mount the throne symbolically of sitting on the lap of his mother, which is the mother par excellence was Queen Isis, and before her, Het Heru, which we call Hathor. And so on this island, de la Site in France, we see that just as last week when we pointed out the double tower, which is basic theme in all the Kemetic temples, you see Notre Dame Cathedral actually has a double tower as well. So we go right to Philae Island, and it's appalling that they actually built the Temple of Notre Dame on an island just like the Temple of Aset on the island of Philae. As a matter of fact, you can see the dramatic parallel between the double pylon and the twin tower and the basic configuration of the temple here with that of Notre Dame itself, a completely plagiarized theme in that the temple itself as well as the island condition. Islands were considered to be sacred in Kemet because they believed that the entire world at one time rose up as a single landmass, which they call Ptah Ta Tenen, in the midst of the primeval waters of the beginning. And so any island throughout Kemet was considered to be sacred. And so you can see the theme carried over into Europe. Matter of fact, it was Vitruvius, the architect, who was really the premier architect of all European architects, and he wrote what we call the 5 books of architecture, and he stated in his book that all temples in Europe should be orientated towards river and in the midst of rivers, just as the ancient Egyptians did. Vitruvius and people such as Christopher Wren and various architects of Europe, they all studied under the writings of Vitruvius.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up about them believing that there's one landmass, because we know now that the people who study the geographical formation of the earth, they have a continent called Pangaea, which is one mass, and then it's split it up into all these different continents and so forth.
In my lecture, I normally demonstrate that Pangaea was separated into several other continents, Gondwana and so forth, Laurasia. And prior to that, again, stated it was one single landmass. And we have the question where Europeans get their scholarship, because our brothers and sisters in ancient Kemet, they knew this. They called the land the Ptah Ta Tenen, the raised land, and they said it's separated into further divisions in the creation, just as geology tells us in the study of plate tectonics, or the geological science of the movement of the continental plates. It's almost one and the same when you look back at the stories that our ancient ancestors told about the creation of the world. Yes. And incidentally, geodesically, in the midst of Pangaea, Africa was always located in the center, and consequently, all around the world, you find people that state that their land actually represents the land of creation. For instance, Seoul, Korea, the site of the past Olympics. Seoul actually means center. In their ancient legends, they state that this was the center of the universe and the place where man was created and so forth. But we know that that is not true, and that is myth, and that Richard Leakey, Donald Johanson, and recently Rebecca Cann, with her DNA studies, have been able to trace every single human being on earth back to a single woman living in Africa about 280,000 years ago. Matter of fact, there was a prominent article in Newsweek the 1st of January of 1988 in which they revealed this, and they actually showed two black people on the cover of Newsweek. And the scientists there state definitely that the first ancestors were heavily pigmented, the euphemism for being black, and that we can all be traced back to these ancestors. And so it's good that we bring that up, because the whole idea of the Garden of Eden, as Moses wrote it, he actually stated that the first river in the garden flowed out from Ethiopia or from the land of the blacks, and then the second and third and fourth rivers were sequentially located outside of that area. So even the Bible shows that the beginning of the earth takes place in Central Africa. And so in the concept of Jesus that you see on the slide here, the idea of the New Jerusalem and the second Adam, which is Jesus, who comes about and corrects the faults of man as brought about by Adam in the fall in the garden. The New Jerusalem represents the place of the beginning. In other words, the place where man is born, which is in the interior of Africa, or in the Genesis story in the highlands of Ethiopia, is the place where man returns for his judgment, which in Kemetic we call the Nekassim. And here is a striking parallel, because right here on the Cathedral of Notre Dame, you can see this picture or image of the European Jesus on his throne above the departed souls as they go before him. Those to the left there are to be found righteous, and to the right you see the scales and the beast there waiting to devour the souls who have been found unrighteous. And this is a theme that goes back thousands of years in ancient Kemet, long before the basilicas and cathedrals were created in Europe. And you can see here is somewhat dark, but you can see the actual scales here, the same scales that you saw on the cathedral, with the deceased being led by Anubis, which is a dog or jackal-headed personage there, taking the deceased before the scales to be weighed. And then you see the beast there below, waiting to devour those who are found unjust. Those who are found just, as you can see in the white, going before Osiris, will gain eternal life. An exact copy and replica of this scene here that you see here from the cathedral here of Notre Dame, right on the temple. So again, not only the architecture, the cathedral pylons, the Great Hall in the interior, the apse and the Holy of Holies was copied, but the art and the iconography as well. And so on that, we'll just stop for a second. I'll just read this quotation from Alexander Moreno, a very noted Egyptologist, who wrote a book called Kings and Gods of Egypt. And it's interesting because he writes in this book the idea about the second death. He states the same idea of the second death of the wicked in hell is fully expressed in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Even the text of the Pyramid of the Fifth Dynasty already point out that the dead must be judged according to the deeds and their names inscribed in the Book of Life in the next world if they are to enjoy a second life there. Christianity, he states, has preserved side by side the two forms of judgment, individual at the death of each man, the final or last judgment at the end of the world. This twofold theme is treated by the artists who decorate our cathedrals and by the author monks who wrote thereon many an edifying treatise. So here, Moret clearly states that the cathedral art and architecture was just put right on the temple based upon the Kemetic theme. Moving along rather quickly here, getting back to Al-Dulusai, the site of Isis, you can see again the birthing house here. And inside the birthing house, incidentally, is the building in front with the little columns, the short building amidst the two pylons there. The birthing house was a very important concept because it represented the land in front of. It represented the land of Punt, the land of the ancestors. And Egypt itself was built in the image of God, or in the image of heaven. And so when they built the birthing houses, they symbolically represented the land of Punt, the place where the gods are born, and actually the place where the entire race of Egyptians, the earliest ancestors, migrated down that 4,100 miles of the Nile to bring the civilization to ancient Egypt. And that is also mentioned in Moret's book, The Gods and Kings of Egypt. There are many scholars who now are in full agreement with the Ta Net, or Holy Land, being located in Africa and not as earlier speculated in Arabia.